Hey leader, Dave Burkus here, organizational psychologist and author of 4 best-selling books on helping leaders and teams do their best work ever. And in this episode, we're going to talk about distractions and how to avoid distractions when working remotely. Distractions at work have been a way of life for many of us for a very, very long time. I mean, if you ask most people about the office that they worked in up until about a year ago, they would tell you it's a distraction-laden place. Ask anyone where they go when they really need to get work done, and they very rarely mention the office. Instead, they disappear to home, or they disappear to a co-working space, or a coffee shop, or a public library, somewhere where they can hide from all of their distractions. And that worked great until everything flipped upside down about a year ago, and we asked people to start living at work. I mean working from home. We asked whole organizations to work remotely, and now people who had been honing their skills avoiding distractions when they were in the workplace now had to hone their skills avoiding distractions at home around the people and the things that they loved. And that's a little bit different, right? That's different than cake in the break room or a noisy coworker who's typing away on their keyboard way too much or talking way too loud on the phone or using speakerphone in a cubicle. I mean, who does that? Now we're dealing with distractions that seem noble. We're dealing with kids who want our attention, or a spouse or a partner who wants our attention. We're dealing with that temptation to, do a quick load of laundry in between calls that turns into somehow being at the kitchen refrigerator eating and snacking when we should actually be working. Distractions are a totally different setup when you're working from home, particularly when you're working remotely from home for an extended period of time. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the ways that you can help to limit those distractions. I will be honest, you can't eliminate distractions from your life any more than you could at the office as well. Some of them you always had to find coping strategies with. But in this episode, we're going to talk specifically to working remotely and working from home, what coping strategies you can develop to be much more effective. So you feel like, again, you're working from home, not living at work. Let's get started. So the first strategy you need to limit distractions when working remotely is to set a schedule. Set your business hours. That doesn't mean you need to go back to Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 or Sunday through Thursday from 8 to 5. It doesn't mean you need 40 hours a week in 8-hour blocks 5 times out of the day. It does mean that just like in the old environment where the office and everyone being there during normal business hours would mean you could get a hold of anyone and you could trust that people were all working roughly the same schedule, you need a set schedule. And you probably need to communicate it to your team, but you also need to communicate it to the people who live around you. These are my work hours, these are my non-work hours. For most of us, even in the last year, we haven't set that schedule. We're just squeezing work in wherever we can instead of developing that schedule for ourselves. And the good news is that in doing that, you've developed a year's worth of data about what schedule works for you, and it probably isn't 8 interrupted hours of focus. It's probably much more integrated than you ever relied on before. But you do need to set what it is, otherwise you're at the mercy of everyone else who's pulling you in a variety of different ways to extend your work schedules. We know that people who work from home are more productive in the short term. They're more productive usually because they're working more hours, which means they're less effective parents, partners, friends, family members, right? And so if we can set a schedule where we say, these are the hours I'm working and these are the hours I'm not, we can be much more focused on the things that matter in that moment and much less distracted from all of those other things. The second strategy for limiting distractions when you're working remotely kind of goes in line with the idea of setting a schedule, and that is when you're building that schedule, be sure to batch your tasks. I mean, if you ever had one of those days where you end up responding to email for like the entire day and you think you were productive, but actually all you did was some responsive work and you never actually made any progress on any of the projects you've been juggling, you probably know how powerful or how powerfully detrimental the inverse of batch tasks are. Just fitting whatever responsive work pops up into your day is not an effective way to go about your day, but declaring these are the hours where I do email, these are the hours where I'm focused on the project, these are the hours where I take meetings, batching them into certain hours or even in certain sort of theme days can go a long way to keeping you focused. It doesn't mean distractions won't pop up, but when that email inbox goes off, you can remind yourself, no, I said from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. I would be focused on deep work of project work, so I'll just have to reply to that email at 3 p.m. instead. As you're setting up your schedule, do this second strategy. Make a plan to look at all of the tasks that you do in your work and batch them. Put them together into either certain blocks of time. I think 60 to 90 minutes works really well for that, or certain days where you're only working on certain projects in certain days. That way, whenever a distraction comes up, you can remind yourself, nope, now's not the time for that. Now is the time to stay focused on X because I batched that task. Now, the third strategy you can use to limit distractions when working remotely is to set work-life boundaries. And what I mean by this is actually just redeclare what those boundaries are. You know, it's funny, before the great work from home experiment began, a lot of us loathed our commute. We loathed how long it took to get from the home to the office. And during the height of it, especially the height of this great work from home experiment, a lot of people were recreating their commute, right? Because they found that it actually created a sort of transitionary phase where they could mentally leave life and focus on work, and vice versa, commuting home. So whether that was a walk around the neighborhood or going to the gym and then coming back as your transitionary phase, people have been rebuilding their commutes because they recognize the power of boundaries between your work and life that signal those things. And you need to do the same. That doesn't mean you need to rebuild your commute if that's not a problem for you, but you do need to think of the ways you can introduce a little friction between work and life. For me personally, this has involved having two devices. So I have a smartphone that is my work-related device. It's got work email, my professional social media accounts, I manage my YouTube channel on it, all of that sort of stuff. And then I have an iPad that has just a personal Facebook account, Netflix, Kindle, Disney Plus, entertainment, and kind of mindless stuff. And at the end of the day, my commute, if you will, is commuting to the charging station in our house, plugging in the smartphone and taking up the tablet so that I have transitioned from work mode to non-work mode. Those little boundaries, those little pieces of friction between work and life go a long way in eliminating some of the distractions when one sphere is trying to remind you about itself while you're trying to focus on that other sphere. Build that friction in and you will be a whole lot more successful limiting some of those extraneous distractions. And the fourth and final strategy also involves boundaries, but it involves people boundaries. You know, the set schedule, the batch tasks, the work-life boundaries, all of that is fantastic unless the people in your life are not respecting it. And I don't just mean the personal people in your life are not respecting your dedicated work time. It probably feels that way. But for a long time, it felt the opposite way. The people in your work life are not respecting your family time. I mean, I mentioned the smartphone earlier. One of the reasons I went to that two-device strategy is that I realized that if you have a smartphone and you have work email on it, then you're taking your work home with you every single night. We used to use that as the sign that something's not right and this person is headed to burnout. They're taking their work home with them. Now everybody does it. That's a problem. So we need to build those boundaries. Now, if you set that schedule and you're communicating that schedule to your work colleagues about when you're responsive and when you're not responsive, that's a great first step into building boundaries in that case around people. But you also need to be boundaries in the times around people in your life that need to give you space to focus on work. So for me, the most effective tool for productivity, probably that I've ever purchased, is a $2.07 red do not disturb sign that I hang on my office door sometimes as a signal to my children when I can be disturbed and when I can't. Our rule goes like this: if my office door is open, come on in, let's talk for a little while. They only ever want like 3 minutes of attention. It's not that big of a deal. But if my door is closed and the door is locked, it's almost never closed without being locked. That might mean that I'm on a phone call or something where you should knock. Tell me what you need and let me see if I can interrupt what's going on to address that. And if the little red do not disturb sign is hanging on the door, then turn around and go back upstairs, right? Unless your brother is bleeding or the house is on fire, I can't be disturbed right now and I need you to respect that. You know, the hardest thing about the do not disturb sign actually was reminding myself that when I left my door open, I needed to give them the attention that they deserved because I left the door open. But in that, I learned the important lesson that building these people boundaries, it's not about blocking people out. It's not about being mean. It's about being focused on work when you're at work so that you can focus on home when you're at home, or vice versa. We don't want this situation where we're multitasking all of these different spheres of our lives and we're doing it all poorly. We want to be focused on the people in front of us. We want to be where our feet actually are in the moments that we're there. And the only way to do that is to build some of these boundaries, work-life boundaries, but also those people boundaries. Now, as I said at the top, these 4 strategies will not eliminate distractions. There is no foolproof way to do that. Unless you want to go charter a boat and take it out to the middle of the ocean and use some sort of satellite internet connection, there's probably no way to limit distractions when working remotely. But what you can do with these strategies is develop ways to increase the amount of work that a distractor has to do to actually get through with you. The amount of resilience and effort that you can put forth to staying focused when those distractions crop up. It's not about eliminating distractions, it's about limiting their effect on you. And these 4 strategies are a great way to do that so that you can do your best work ever and then live your best life ever. Hey, thanks so much for watching this episode. If you liked it, make sure you're subscribed or following this channel. And if you really liked it and you want to go deeper, then check out the resources we have for you at davidburkus.com/resources. Guaranteed there's something in there that'll help you and your team do your best work ever.